Today we're going to be comparing two of the hottest subsonic cartridges for the AR-15 platform. Number one, 300 Blackout, very proven. Then we have Hornady's new 338 ARC. Both of these are built to be whisper quiet with a silencer and hit hard at close range. Today we're going to break down power, cost, suppressor, safety, and why I would pick either one of these. Quick merch plug, if you'd like to help support the channel directly because I'm currently demonetized on YouTube, likely forever. The best way to do that is shop at OnlyTacticalFans at Shopify.com, where you can purchase really awesome merch like morale patches, hoodies, hats, beanies. All that money goes to supporting this channel, and I'll take it and I'll crumple it into a little ball and I'll shove it directly into my bank account to help pay the bills and everything around that. Now you might be asking, CRS, hey, about this video, so you're going after 300 Blackout and 338 ARC, why not just load Subsonic 5.56 ammo? Which is a great question because you can. You can take 5.56 ammo and just load it up with a powder called Trail Boss, and now you have Subsonic 5.56 ammo. It'll fly right around 1,000 feet per second. However, it doesn't create enough pressure to reliably cycle an AR-15. In a bolt action, yeah, that's a great option. It's a great way to go. And another thing, before you hop in the comments and be like, well, hey, what about this particular loading or this particular loading? This vehicle will be limited in scope strictly to subsonic performance with these two cartridges. Because if I'm going to pick a supersonic cartridge, I'm going to pick a 5.56. It's way cheaper. It flies faster, it shoots lighter. Both these, in my head, only exist for the pure reason to be silenced or subsonic. So why 5.56? Why? What's going on here? Here's why I would choose 300 Blackout or 300 ARC for subsonic use only. And if I did want to go with supersonic, I would go 5.56. Obviously, I already talked about it shoots flatter and faster, but there's also another little aspect a lot of people don't realize. When you're flying over 2,200 feet per second, I have no idea why this number is this number, but it is. It truly is. You create a hydroshock wave that goes through the wound cavity, the temporary wound cavity, that stretches it to a point to where it can't handle it, and you start getting ripping and tearing at the edges and margins. Plus, you have the fragmentation of the bullet. So you're causing way more damage to a target if you're going faster than 2,200 feet per second. You're not just causing crushing power, basically destroying what's directly in front of the bullet, you're also destroying stuff off to the side. It's more devastating. Then you got the fragmentation of the bullet. It just works better. You will get more destruction and more power than you will slower supersonic rounds.
Temporary wound cavity, as we expand and recover from, is different when projectiles hit at greater than 2,200 feet a second. At that point, it appears we have surpassed the elasticity capability of human tissue, and that temporary wound cavity begins tearing at its limits and margins and becomes the permanent wound cavity, which also is the conclusion why people who are center punched with rifle projectiles typically succumb much quicker than people who are hit with handgun projectiles. The byproduct of that also seems that when a rifle projectile at those velocities bypasses an organ, you will still have organic damage, whereas a handgun projectile needs to directly hit a vital organ to do organic damage.
Now, the 300 Blackout does have that one round on a 16-inch barrel where you can just barely get over 2,200 feet per second right at the muzzle, but generally speaking, both these fly slower than 2,200 feet per second. And why would you build a 16-inch 300 Blackout? No, you're going to build an 8-inch 300 Blackout or 338 ARC with an 8-inch silencer, and then you're going to pin and weld it on so you have a one-stamp rifle that's an SBR. That's how I would do it in my head. Yes, supersonic versions do exist, and they do carry more kinetic energy than 5.56, especially at the muzzle, and sometimes quite a bit more. So that being acknowledged that those two cartridges do have supersonic versions that do have more kinetic energy than 5.56, yes, the 5.56 has lower total energy, but way more effective damage. Those with their energy, because they're not moving that fast, the bullet's going to probably stay as a hole, and it's going to penetrate really deep. So those will get a deeper penetration, but a less devastating wound cavity, if that makes any sense. So let's compare energy with some factory loads. Remember, for me, and I apologize I have to repeat myself because this is important, because even with me repeating myself this much, we're still going to see it in the comments. For me, these cartridges, the 338 and the 300, only exist for subsonic use. So I'm only going to compare subsonic loadings against the 5.56. And yes, this is an apples and oranges comparison, but I'm doing this strictly because everybody knows the 5.56. They know what kind of damage it is. So I want you to have realistic expectations what kind of kinetic energy these two rifles can actually put down. And that's why I'm using the 5.56 as comparison, because you know what that is. So now let's compare it to these two subsonic loads so you know realistically what you're getting for kinetic energy. All right, so Supersonic 5.56, you got 55 grain, that's 1,300 foot-pounds of kinetic energy at the muzzle. Then you got the 62 grain, which is 1,250 foot-pounds of kinetic energy at the muzzle. And that's typically why people go with 55 grain, just because it carries more kinetic energy. Plus, out of a 20-inch barrel like the M16 style, you're carrying 2,200 feet per second all the way down to 300 yards. So you're getting that super awesome wound cavity that you don't get with these two all the way to 300 yards, which is pretty amazing. 62 grain still goes pretty far. I think it's like 220 yards. I haven't looked at the numbers in 3 years, so don't quote me on that. So, subsonic Blackout, you are looking at 190 grain to 220 grain, and it's going to only carry 465 foot-pounds of kinetic energy to 500 foot-pounds of kinetic energy at the muzzle. That's compared to 1,300 in best case scenario with 5.56. So you may be asking, well, hey, Mr. CRS, what about the 338? That's a way heavier round. It's got to carry more kinetic energy. Oh, it does. Quite a bit more. Almost double the 300 Blackout, but significantly less than the 5.56. The 307 grain 338 arc is only going to carry 751 foot-pounds of kinetic energy at the muzzle. And the gap gets greater the farther you go out. At 100 yards, the gap gets way bigger. So the 5.56 is still carrying over 1,000 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. It's typically between 1,050 and 1,100 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. The subs, they will drop to like 400 to 600 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. That's getting pretty bad. By 200 yards, the subs are in the low threes, where 5.56 is still between 700 and 900 foot-pounds. That's pretty awesome. And like I said, if you're at the 55 grain, with a 20-inch barrel, you're also still getting the hydro shock at 300 yards. Plus, it's going to be a flatter round, it's going to shoot faster, it's going to be cheaper ammunition, it's going to have probably similar recoil. I haven't actually compared the recoil between the two, and I should have probably looked at that before I made this video, but we're going to assume similar recoil. So unsuppressed, longer range, maximum terminal damage, 5.56 all day long. Now that we've taken that off, we're going to get rid of the 5.56 and we're going to concentrate strictly on these two cartridges because that's what we're here to compare. Now you have a realistic expectation of what kind of kinetic energy they can actually put down and at what range. Now when we're going subsonic and you slap a suppressor on it and you want that deep thump, as I already discussed, the 5.56 can load subsonic, but it's not going to work in your AR-15. You're going to have to go with 300 Blackout or 338 arc. So let's explore the two and see which one's better. 300 Blackout has been the king since 2011, and you only need a barrel swap. That's it. The 338 just dropped in 2024, so there's still like kind of research and development going on. Not really, because Hornady is a very, very reputable company, and believe me, they did their testing. But it's still just being fielded, so there's still going to be some things that are going to be discovered. It's basically a mini 8.6 Blackout in the AR-15 package, because you don't have to go with the AR-10 with the 338, where the 8.6 you do have to go with an AR-10 platform. So that's why a lot of people are really going to the 338 arc, because you want an 8.6, but you don't want the AR-10 platform. So a true apples comparison, let's start talking about loads. We're going to stick with Hornady loads just to keep it consistent. Your 300 Blackout, 190 grain, that's going to be flying at 1,050 feet per second, is going to deliver 456 foot-pounds of kinetic energy onto the target. What does that mean? Yeah, that number sounds cool, but what does that realistically mean? Really, you're looking at a 45 ACP, a hot load. That's it. So the pistol, the 45, the 1911, is the kind of kinetic energy the 300 Blackout's legitimately putting on target. Now the 338, we got a 307 grain, sub-X. The same velocity, 1,050 feet per second, you are putting 751 foot-pounds of kinetic energy down onto the target. So what does that mean? That's realistically about a 357 Magnum or a 10 millimeter territory, right in there. So you're looking at same speed, but 60% more kinetic energy. If you're hunting deer or hunting hogs suppressed and you need ethical shots, one-shot performance, the difference is pretty huge. It really is. You're going from a 45 ACP to a Magnum pistol. That's not bad. But for plinking or home defense, 300 Blackout all day long. That's just a better cartridge for that. Here's why the 300 Blackout fights back hard. And that's why it's going to be better for plinking or home defense. A factory box of 20 rounds, that's Hornady Sub X. You're looking at 300 Blackout running about $28 to $32 on the street. Different places, different prices, but that's a rough range, and I use same distributors. This way it would keep it equal. Like I didn't go to Midway for one and Brownells for another. It'd be Midway and Midway. So this way it's comparable. 338 ARC, you're looking at $32 to $40. That's 15 to 20% more per round. See where it adds up? So obviously, plinking or home defense, you're going to want to go 300 Blackout because you're going to get more trigger time. More trigger time, you're going to be better at plinking. You're going to have a more enjoyable range day, and especially for home defense. The more trigger time you have under a stressful situation like somebody just broke into my front door, we'll pretend it's a bear because this is YouTube. So this giant grizzly bear just broke into my front door. My hands are sweaty, my heart's racing. I'm going to do best with the gun that I've had the most trigger time on. And you're going to get the most trigger time with the cheapest round of ammunition. And now you may be saying like, well, can't I just reload the rounds? Wouldn't that solve this problem, Mr. CRS, Mr. Smarty Pants? It actually gets worse when you reload. So a 190 grain Sub X bullet is about 48 cents each for a box of 100. The 307s, the 338s is about 90 cents each. And you can't even get boxes of 100, well, it's not that you can't get boxes of 100. They typically come in boxes of 50. So you can get boxes of 100, but typically you're looking at boxes of 50. So the projectiles alone cost nearly double. So if you're reloading versus buying factory ammo, now you're doing double the cost. Where factory ammo, it wasn't double the cost. So it's cheaper, like less of a price split, just buying factory ammo than it is to reload. High volume shooters, like I said, for fun. Training, like realistically using this rifle to get better. 300 Blackout all day. $20 to $40, you're saving every 100 trigger pulls. That's pretty amazing. So, all right, that's not looking very good for the ammo, okay? That really sucks. Like, so clearly the ammunition is more expensive. Well, what about the rest of the parts? What about the silencer? Since like the whole purpose of this video is silencers, how much is the silencer, Mr. CRS? Let's take a look at that. And well, that can be a deal breaker because silencers are pretty expensive. With the 300 Blackout, you're looking at a standard 30 caliber can. So that's going to be a can that can go on 300 Win Mags, your 308s. Like I said, it's pretty standard. Now for a 33 caliber can, you're going to have to go to like an Omega 36M or something like that. You're going to be looking at either like a multi-use cam that can either go on like a pistol, like a hybrid, or something to that effect because you've got to have a bigger bore. You can't be sending a 33 caliber bullet down a 30 caliber bullet hole. So those usually cost between $100 to $300 more. And I went across a whole bunch of different manufacturers. There was only like one I found where the 33 caliber was actually somehow cheaper than the 30. But realistically speaking, you're looking at between $100 to $300 more for a silencer in 33 caliber over 30 caliber. Now the next part really stands out to me. So I used to have a bunch of AR-15s in 5.56. The problem with 300 Blackout is it uses the exact same magazine, it uses kind of a similar looking round. It uses the exact same bullet carrier. So you can chamber a 300 Blackout into a 5.56 barrel. One of my very first subscribers, East Texas Outlaws, sent me a picture when I started making the channel that actually exposing this problem to me. He had accidentally changed because he had 300 Blackout magazines loaded and he had 5.56 magazines loaded, and if I remember correctly, he was doing some sort of drill, and somehow or another he had winded up getting a 300 Blackout magazine mixed into his 5.56 magazines. Bam, slams it in there, hits the paddle on the side, boom, blows his rifle up. Not cool, not cool at all. The fact of the matter is a 300 Blackout is a terrible idea to have around 5.56 rifles because you can actually drop the bolt on a 300 Blackout in a 5.56 chambering.
Again, this is 300 Blackout into a 223 barrel. Okay. I believe that one would have fired.
It'd be like having a bunch of regular Mountain Dew cans in your fridge, just all sitting there nice and looking good. And then you got one Mountain Dew can that looks slightly different, but it's loaded with poison. I think everybody, any sane person would say, why even take that risk? Yeah, I'm never going to intentionally grab that. I know that one's poison, but the fact that it's sitting there with other things I'm going to drink, why not just take it out of the fridge? Why not eliminate the problem from the get? Just remove the problem. And that's where the 338 comes in. Because the 338 uses a 6.5 Grendel case. And it uses a larger bolt carrier, and it uses a different magazine. So therefore, you cannot put a 338 ARC into a 5.56 barrel. You have zero risk of catastrophic failure. So for me, this is huge because I ran multiple 5.56 rifles. I would not run a 300 Blackout. So you're looking at zero catastrophic risk failure. And that's huge for anyone that's running multiple 5.56 rifles. 300 Blackout though is just a barrel swap. That's all you need. It uses the exact same bolt carrier, exact same magazine. We've already discussed this before. The 338, that's a Type 2 Grendel bolt. It's a Grendel magazine. We already discussed that. So obviously it's going to be easier and simpler to convert over to a 300 Blackout over a 338 ARC, because a 338 ARC, you basically can only use the upper and lower receiver. You're going to have a new barrel, you're going to have a new magazine, you're going to have a new bolt carrier. Quick disclaimer, I'm currently a felon right now, waiting for my appeal, so I don't have any firearms and I'm not building any firearms right now. But when I win, and I will, and I get my rights back, I fully intend jumping right back into the AR-15 5.56 ecosphere. That's not quite the right words. It'd be stratosphere. No, that ain't it either. Ecosystem. And I don't plan on getting a silencer. Not unless they come off of the NFA registry or something in my brain changes. But currently, I'm not doing a tax stamp. So, for me, let's pretend that did happen. Let's pretend it did come off of the registry, or somehow I changed my mind about tax stamps. I would absolutely go with 338 ARC. I just don't feel like rolling the dice on the risk, especially when I'm going to have a whole bunch of AR-15s all chambered in 5.56, which means I'm going to have a whole bunch of magazines laying around. I don't want to accidentally, and shit happens, I don't want to accidentally grab a 300 Blackout magazine, be doing like a speed drill, running through the range, switch magazine, boom, there goes my rifle, which is probably going to cost more than $1,000. If I don't get injured, great, but I still lost $1,000, but there's still the chance of getting injured. It just can happen. With 5.56, you're rolling a huge risk when you go with 300 Blackout. So again, for me, when I win my appeal, two of the suppressors come off the NFA, or somehow I change my mind about tax stamps, yeah, 338 ARC all day long. Now, if you'd like to help support the channel, there's a couple of different ways to do it. One, bam, you can click on this little guy right here, and that'll take you to my Cash App, where you can do donations, which I understand if you don't want to. Don't worry about that. I do have another way for you to support the channel that doesn't even cost you a penny, and that is, go down in the description, click on my Amazon affiliate link. Even if you don't buy what that link is for, just clicking on it and doing the Amazon shopping you were already going to do anyway, that'll kick back for it because you came there off my channel. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.